Traditionally, archaeologists tend to date them to later periods, sometimes only a few hundred years old. But as a fact, copper was known to some of the oldest civilizations on record and has an official history of at least 10,000 years. It is estimated that about 200,000 visitors have passed through the area over the past 40 years, with most of them taking archaeological artifacts as souvenirs. However, the region is still abundant with objects of past civilizations. Hopefully, in time, this could be acknowledged as one of the world's richest archaeological sites. In exploring the Eye of Africa, we were shown ancient fishing equipment as well as stone rings that were used thousands of years ago. They resembled the same shape and design we'd seen the fishermen at the coast use to bind and weigh down their nets. It was explained to us how these and other artifacts were once used for fishing. This was further evidence to us that what is now 400 kilometers inland may have once been a place by the sea. So there was no shortage of artifacts in the area. But what puzzled Natlis and I was the absence of any remains of buildings which would have made up this huge city. Of what materials had the buildings been constructed? To find answers, we searched again in Plato's words.
Stone was used in their work.
This means the buildings were made from natural stone, quarried locally. That is very similar to how the locals still construct their homes today, in the ancient techniques that their ancestors used thousands of years ago.
The locals take loose and uncut rocks and use a crude mixture of mud and dung as mortar to build. No bricks are used, just stone from the area.
The stone which they used was quarried from the center island.
Examining a satellite image of the Richard today, one sees what appears to be a quarry or mine in the center. Although the locals are not aware of any mining activity around the Richard.
The stone which they quarried was white, another black, and a third red.
In the valleys of the Richard, the predominant colors of the rocks are a deep red, black, and white. We came across a building which the locals had constructed about 30 years ago, which had been built using the same ancient techniques as their ancestors. Interestingly, this building shows the very same colors as Plato had described.
What had happened to all these structures?
Due to the way the buildings are constructed, only a short while after they collapse or are abandoned, they could disintegrate into a pile of loose rocks with no shape or form. One is unable to see any sign of a building just a few decades after its destruction. This is just how the Richard appears today, endless heaps of loose rocks. Moreover, if the city was destroyed as violently and quickly as Plato described, one doubts there would be much of anything left of the walls and buildings 12,000 years later.
To George and I, it was amazing how closely Plato's description matched the actual features at the Eye of Africa. Each culture has some form of mythology. Myth stems from legend, and legend from history. Often threads of truth are spun into the storytelling that make up myths and legends.
For example, for centuries, Homer's Iliad, which tells the epic adventures in the war against Troy, was considered Greek poetry with no real historical value. It was seen as nothing but a fantastic tale, filled with giants, monsters, and impossibly beautiful women. Even the great city of Troy seemed to exist only in Homer's imagination. However, in the 1870s, a wealthy businessman named Heinrich Schliemann excavated a site he believed to be the city of Troy. Schliemann unearthed several levels of cities, built one after the other. One of them has now been identified as Homer's Troy. An excellent example of how history became legend and legend became myth. Will the Richard one day be linked to the great legend? Another example is the ancient Cambodian city of Angkor. The lost city of Angkor was a legend for centuries. Cambodian villagers living at the edge of the thick jungle told tales of huge temples and buildings hidden in a dense tropical forest. Their stories were casually dismissed by the authorities as legends and fairy tales. However, some explorers believed in the tales of a powerful and rich Cambodian empire, and towards the end of the 19th century, the great temples of Angkor in the deep jungle were discovered. The legend became fact, and the lost city was opened up to the world. A stream of explorers, historians, and archaeologists are still coming to Angkor to study the vast ancient city.
This is another example of how history became legend, and legend became myth.
Perhaps the most compelling evidence that this could have been where Atlantis existed is the size and shape of the Richard. Plato's dimensions of Atlantis were quite detailed. Particularly, the diameter of the outer wall as per Plato and the size of the Richard correspond very closely, with a diameter of 23 kilometers. Let us look at some facts Plato gave us.
The main city of Atlantis consists of concentric circles of water and land.
Fact. That is what the Richard consists of.
The main city was constructed with red, black, and white rocks.
Fact. These are the type of stones which exist in the Richard.
The surrounding lands of Atlantis were grazed by elephants.
Fact. We found remains of elephant.
A well near the central Acropolis provided the city with fresh water.
Fact. Yes, a well was discovered.
Atlantis is based in a part of the Atlantic which is now no longer accessible by ship.
Fact. The Richard meets this criteria.
The capital city of Atlantis was densely crowded.
Fact. The number of ancient artifacts found is staggering, indicating a once dense population.
The area surrounding the capital city is sheltered by mountains from the north and open towards the south.
Fact. This is the exact layout of the Richard.
The main island of Atlantis is marked by a huge plain.
Fact. We traveled for hours through this extensive plain.
The plain was surrounded by mountains leading towards the sea.
Fact. We have seen the mountains leading towards the old ocean bed.
There was an abundance of metals like copper and gold.
Fact. The main export items of Mauritania today are metals like copper, iron, and even gold. The Eye of Africa is the structure that most closely matches Plato's account of Atlantis. Every other site that has been proposed falls desperately short of the dimensions, design, and scale of the fabled city. But what about other evidence?
Is there any way we can link the cultures of people presently living in West Africa to the culture of Atlantis? What do we know about the culture of the Atlanteans?
Well, thanks to Plato, quite a bit. We know from him that their main god was Poseidon, the god of the sea the god of the waters, usually portrayed as half human and half fish.